Imagine living next door to a family, for years. Like, you think you know them, and then one day they just vanish.
It's like something out of a nightmare.
Right. And all the lights are left on in this, like, big 19-room mansion, every light burning day and night.
Yeah.
That's actually what happened in 1971 in Westfield, New Jersey with the List family. It's the beginning of a really bizarre story.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that continues to fascinate and horrify even decades later. Like you said, this seemingly normal family just disappeared.
And the secret that was hidden inside their house, it shocked the whole community and the country. This is the story of John Lissus, the man who killed his whole family and then just disappeared.
And then resurfaced almost 20 years later.
It's crazy. We're going to deep dive into this case today.
It really makes you think about the dark side of, like the American dream and how much pressure people feel to keep up appearances.
Totally. And we've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. We have news reports from back then, court transcripts, and even a clip from the true crime podcast, My Favorite Murder.
Oh yeah, they did an episode on John List. It's a good one. They talk about how his case is connected to the show America's Most Wanted.
Which is actually how he was eventually caught. But we'll get to that later.
Right. First, let's go back to 1971 and look at the List family.
So from the outside, they seem like the perfect suburban family. They had this huge mansion they called Breeze Knoll. John List. The dad was a successful accountant, a devout Lutheran, a Sunday school teacher.
He was a Boy Scout leader, too. I mean, really the picture of respectability.
And his wife, Helen. I mean, there were whispers that she had problems with alcohol, but they kept up appearances.
They had 3 teenage kids, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. They were involved in all the normal stuff, school extracurricular activities.
And John's mom, Alma, lived with them, too.
So, on the surface, it looked like they had it all.
But like we said, things were not as they seemed. There was a lot going on beneath the surface.
A lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
John List had a secret that would eventually destroy everything.
And it all started to unravel when he lost his job. He was so ashamed that he couldn't even tell his family.
So he would pretend to go to work every day. He'd get dressed, go to the train station, and then spend the day at the library just reading newspapers.
Can you imagine the pressure he must have been under?
It's hard to even fathom. He was so desperate to maintain this image of success. And to make matters worse, they were drowning in debt. That big house, the mortgage, it was all a huge financial drain.
And to keep up with the bills, he started stealing money from his own mother's bank account.
It's just a really sad situation all around. You can see how the pressure was building, and John List felt like he had no way out.
And that's when he made a truly horrific decision. On November 9, 1971, he decided to kill his entire family.
It's just chilling. It's almost impossible to understand how someone could do something like that.
He started by shooting his wife Helen in the head while she was having her morning coffee.
And then he went upstairs and shot his mother Alma the same way.
It's just so brutal and cold-blooded. And then he waited for his kids to come home from school.
One by one, they came home and he shot each of them.
It's almost too horrible to even think about. And the My Favorite Murder podcast, they talk about this really disturbing detail about John Jr.'s murder.
Yeah, apparently John List had actually taken John Jr. to a soccer game that day, watched him play, drove him home, and then shot him.
Multiple times.
Yeah, it's just unimaginable.
After he killed everyone, he dragged all the bodies to the ballroom and covered their faces.
Like something out of a horror movie.
It's just so eerie and disturbing. And then he started covering his tracks. He wrote letters explaining what he did, canceled the newspaper deliveries, even fed the family's pet fish.
He wanted to make it seem like they had just disappeared.
And this is one letter he wrote to his pastor.
Oh yeah, that's a really important piece of evidence. He basically laid out his justification for killing his family in that letter.
Yeah, he said that he was saving their souls from the sinfulness of the world. He thought the 1970s were a time of moral decay, and he was really disturbed by his daughter Patricia's interest in acting.
He thought it was a path to corruption.
So he really thought he was doing them a favor.
That's what's so scary about it. He was completely convinced that he was right. He thought that death was preferable to living in a world that he saw as increasingly wicked.
But if that were true, wouldn't he have killed himself too?
That's the hypocrisy of it all. He claimed that suicide was a sin, so he couldn't do it. He was willing to condemn his entire family to death, but not himself.
It's the ultimate act of selfishness, a way to rationalize a truly monstrous crime.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next part of the story. John List's disappearance and the 18 years he spent living a lie.
It's really unbelievable how he was able to just vanish and build a whole new life for himself.
It's like something out of a movie. But we'll get to that after the break. He just disappeared, like completely erased his old life and became someone new. It's amazing how someone can do that
Yeah.
after what he did.
I know, it's mind-blowing.
Oof.
He changed his name to Robert Peter Clark and moved to Denver, Colorado.
Got a job as an accountant, started going to a Lutheran church, even got remarried.
It's just crazy to think about. Meanwhile, his family, Helen's family, Alma's family, his own kids, they were all left wondering what happened to them.
It must have been agonizing, not knowing what happened to their loved ones.
The police never gave up on the case, but for years there were no leads. Then in 1989, they got a break. The show America's Most Wanted decided to feature John List's case.
That was a turning point. The producers of the show worked with a forensic artist named Frank Bender to create an age progression bust of what John List might look like after all those years.
And this is where my favorite murder episode gets really interesting. They talk about how accurate that bust was.
I know, it's incredible. Bender studied pictures of List's parents, really analyzed how they aged, and then he used that information to predict how List would age.
He even predicted that List would be wearing thick, dark-framed glasses.
He thought List would choose those glasses to look more authoritative, more respectable, like he was trying to hide the shame he felt.
Wow, I never thought about that. It's amazing how much you can tell about a person from something like a pair of glasses.
Right. And it turned out that Bender was spot on. That bust and the story on America's Most Wanted were seen by millions of people, including one of List's neighbors in Denver.
No way. Talk about a coincidence.
Right. The man who tried so hard to disappear was brought down by a TV show about catching fugitives.
And get this. The My Favorite Murder hosts said that List was actually watching that episode of America's Most Wanted when his segment came on.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, and his new wife was sitting right next to him and had no idea who he really was.
Oh, so much. That's like something you'd see in a movie.
I know, it's crazy. So after 18 years on the run, John List was finally arrested and brought back to New Jersey to stand trial.
It's kind of hard to believe that after all that time, he was finally going to have to answer for what he did.
So what happened at the trial? Did he try to use that saving their souls defense again?
He did. He tried to say that his family was going to be bankrupt and that he was saving them from a life of poverty and shame.
So he was still blaming everyone else.
Yeah. And he also claimed that he had PTSD from his time in the military and that his wife's drinking was a big part of the problem, too.
It sounds like he was grasping at straws.
He even tried to say that he hadn't planned the murders in advance, that he only decided to do it that morning.
But come on, he wrote those letters?
Yeah.
He planned his escape? He clearly thought about this for a long time.
Exactly. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw right through his lies.
So what happened?
He was convicted on 5 counts of murder and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison.
Wow. So he spent the rest of his life behind bars.
He died in prison in 2008. But even though the case is closed, there's still one more thing I want to talk about. The fire that destroyed Breeze Knoll.
Oh, yeah. What's up with that? It happened years after List was caught, right?
Right. It's kind of like a final chapter in this whole saga.
Some people think it was like a symbolic cleansing, a way to get rid of the bad memories associated with that house.
That's an interesting thought. And My Favorite Murder hosts mentioned that there was a really valuable Tiffany skylight in the ballroom of that house.
Really?
Yeah. And it was destroyed in the fire, which is kind of ironic because if List had just sold that skylight, he probably could have avoided all of this.
Are you serious? So the thing that could have saved you was right there in his house the whole time.
It's almost like fate was playing a cruel joke on him. The thing he was trying so hard to protect his financial security was something he could have easily gotten rid of.
It makes you wonder if he ever thought about that skylight after he went to prison. If he ever regretted what he did.
It's hard to know what was going on in his mind, but it definitely makes you think about the choices we make in life and how even small decisions can have huge consequences.
It's a good reminder that sometimes we focus on the wrong things. We get so caught up in money and appearances that we lose sight of what really matters.
Absolutely. And this case really highlights the dark side of the American dream. The pressure to succeed can be so intense that it drives people to do terrible things.
Yeah. It's a reminder that we need to be careful about the values we prioritize and the choices we make.
And that we need to find healthy ways to cope with stress and adversity. Because when we let those things consume us, it can lead to really tragic outcomes.
This deep dive into the John List case has been really fascinating. But it's also been pretty disturbing.
It's definitely a case that stays with you. It's a reminder that even in seemingly ordinary places, darkness can lurk beneath the surface.
And that the choices we make can have ripple effects that we may never fully understand.
It's a story that challenges us to confront the complexities of human nature and to think critically about the world around us.
It's crazy, right? He just like snapped and killed his whole family, and then he just went on with his life like nothing happened.
It's really hard to wrap your head around it, and what's even more disturbing is that he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing.
I know, that's what gets me. He was so convinced that he was saving his family from something worse than death. It makes you wonder about like the nature of morality, you know?
Yeah, like how can someone be so sure they're doing good when they're committing such a horrific act?
I think a lot of it had to do with his fear of failure. He was so obsessed with keeping up appearances, he even cut himself out of all the family photos.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's really symbolic, like he was trying to erase himself from the picture before it all fell apart.
And speaking of things falling apart, what about that fire that destroyed Breeze Knoll?
That always felt like a strange epilogue to the whole story.
I know it happened years after List was caught, so it wasn't like he could have been involved.
Right, but some people see it as a kind of cleansing, you know? Like the house had to be destroyed to get rid of all the bad memories.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Mm.
And remember what the My Favorite Murder hosts said about the Tiffany skylight?
Oh, yeah, the one that was in the ballroom. It was worth a fortune.
And Liz could have sold it to get out of debt. But he didn't.
It's almost like fate was taunting him. The solution to his problems was right there in his house the whole time.
It's kind of poetic in a dark way. You know what I mean?
I do. It's a reminder that we often focus on the wrong things in life. We get so caught up in material possessions and appearances that we forget what truly matters.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, but it's also been pretty heavy.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about the darker side of human nature.
It reminds us that even in seemingly normal families, there can be deep secrets and hidden struggles.
And that we should never take our own lives or the lives of others for granted.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the twisted case of John List.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep exploring the world around you.
And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more thought-provoking conversations. Until next time.